Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. This is a place for vibrant discussions about mindfulness, movement practices, and ways to find more balance and presence in daily life. Here you'll find resources to help you progress on your path, as well as insightful conversations with mindful movement, yoga, meditation, and Dharma teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight embodied approaches to mindfulness and the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the podcast. Today, I'm going to be going over 6 common mindfulness myths, things I think people often get wrong about mindfulness and meditation. It's important not because I like to make people wrong, but because some of these things can actually stop people before they even start if they don't understand what mindfulness is or how it works. Some of these myths have people convinced that they can't do it, even if they are kind of interested in the benefits of mindfulness. And some of these misconceptions I'll talk about are actually worries people have that perhaps mindfulness will take them in the wrong direction and make their anxiety or stress worse because they'll be focusing too much on it. Or on the opposite end, some worry that mindfulness or meditation might be a way of dissociating and avoiding reality. None of this should be the case if you are learning mindfulness from a well-trained teacher or a reliable source. But of course, people are out there using these terms in all kinds of ways, and it's no wonder that we end up with a lot of confusion. So let's try to bring some clarity to the confusion today and debunk these misconceptions. Before we dive into it, I want to mention the Teacher Masterclass coming up this Sunday, June 30th, 2024. It is a donation-based casual gathering for anyone who identifies as a movement, yoga, or meditation teacher, something in that vein, or perhaps you're thinking about becoming a teacher. This is our second meetup. We're starting this series, and it's just a supportive community that I would like to grow because I often think about how we teachers in this field just don't really get enough connection and encouragement and the ability to share ideas with each other and spaces to do that in. We will have a special guest this time. Jenny from Chi Curious Qigong will be giving us a presentation about Qi and energy and some interesting history of Qigong, so it's going to be lots of fun. You can go to the Teacher Masterclass page on my website to RSVP and get the Zoom link to join us at the next gathering. And again, it's donation-based, so you just offer what is affordable for you, and that's optional. The website is movedtomeditate.yoga/teacher-masterclasses. If you can't remember that, just look for the link in the show notes. And if you are not a teacher, but you're here listening to the podcast because you're learning about mindful movement or meditation as a student or a curious potential student, be sure to check out the past episodes for even more resources. This is episode 95 of this podcast, so there's lots, and I will put a link in the show notes to some other episodes that relate to today's topic if you want to go deeper on a specific piece of it. I know I did one about working with thoughts in meditation a while back, and also one about anxiety in meditation, and there are also guided meditation practices on the podcast that you can listen to for free. Another way that you can go deeper in your meditation exploration is by working with a teacher. I offer one-on-one mindfulness coaching sessions, which can help you start or refine a traditional style meditation practice or create a stillness-free alternative meditation practice, or maybe build on your existing mindful movement or yoga practice. These sessions can also include specific conversations on how mindfulness can help you navigate stress or change or a life situation that you're going through. We can personalize the tools and the techniques to fit what you currently need so you can find more ease, wisdom, and meaning every day. The rates for my one-on-one sessions are sliding scale because I want to keep it within budget for as many of you as possible. So you can go to my website to learn more about this too. The info is at movestomeditate.yoga/private sessions. And of course, I will put all of the links that I've mentioned in the show notes. So, okay, let's get to these pesky mindfulness misconceptions and break this down. All right, so the first one that I wanted to talk about is the idea that mindfulness is just a mental exercise. And when I say mental exercise, I mean like it's leaving out the body part, like the feeling of we're in a body and the body is involved in the present moment, right? The separation of body and mind that is so prevalent in our culture. And I understand how the term mindfulness can sound that way. It's like mindfulness, right? But that is a translation from the word sati, which comes from the Pali language, which was a vernacular language in India at the time of the Buddha, and the early Buddhist texts were written down in that language. And then the first translations into English from Pali were done in the Victorian era. And the translators of that time, of course, struggled to find succinct English words to capture these concepts that didn't really exist in the English language and Western culture, and to capture the fullness of terms like sati. And they were clearly influenced by Western thought and philosophy, like, for example, that Cartesian dualistic mind-body split, right? That separation of body and mind, or the hierarchy of mind over matter, that we've been trying to unpack for a long time here in these kinds of spaces, that we've inherited this kind of distortion from some of our earlier Western philosophies. But those thoughts were very influential at the time when a word like mindfulness was chosen as the translation, right, to represent this whole type of meditation and all the teachings and philosophies that go along with it. Okay, but in actuality, if you read the Buddhist texts, mindfulness of the body is the first foundation of mindfulness. So when you dig in and you study this, you realize the body is more than included in the practice. It's essential to the practice. The meditation techniques start with the breath, which is happening in the body. They start with observing body sensations, getting to know the feeling of the body, and including the bodily movements and all the activities we do with the body as opportunities for paying attention, for developing our mindfulness. The texts and the classical techniques of mindfulness involve being aware of our experience through our senses as well, the seeing, the hearing, touching, tasting, smelling. So mindfulness is actually very grounded in embodiment, despite the way the word mindfulness might sound. And the body is considered a really key resource for developing awareness. So it's not just a mental exercise, but more like a way of bringing our mental attention into the present moment, into connection with the body. Okay, misconception number 2. Let's talk about the second one. And the one I wanted to bring up here is this myth or idea that mindfulness is just focusing on a single anchor or a single focal point, which is what we call concentration in the whole umbrella field of mindfulness meditation. These are interrelated skills, and the terms kind of make things confusing because we use mindfulness and concentration together in this style of practice. So stay with me here. Hopefully you can follow this as I try to explain the connection between the two and how mindfulness goes beyond just that concentration bit. Okay, so a lot of meditation techniques are about bringing our focus to a single object or single anchor, and that is part of mindfulness, but it's not the whole practice. It's easy to miss this fact because most of the time when people in general talk about meditation, they are talking about that single-pointed concentration aspect of meditation. And this is important to tease out because a lot of people think they can't practice meditation or practice mindfulness if they're under the impression that it just requires these powers of concentration that a lot of us, feel like we kind of don't have. So let's put it into context, because we do use concentration and some amount of focusing in mindfulness meditation, because it does help when we can steady the mind, at least some, and develop more mental balance and clarity. All of that helps us see more clearly. And for example, you will find this in techniques like we use the breath as an anchor, or we silently recite loving kindness phrases or a mantra of some kind. Having that one main thing be your focus is basically the concentration part of the practice, which is hugely beneficial, of course. But in mindfulness, there's more. Once we have some measure of steadiness, and it doesn't have to be perfect, we then begin to include more aspects of our experience and investigate the things that are arising. Like, imagine you're sitting there focusing on the breath, but thoughts show up. Thoughts. Or a wave of emotion or some kind of like compelling body sensation shows up. In mindfulness practice, which you'll also hear called vipassana or insight meditation, we make a note of those events. And sometimes we go deeper into investigating those kinds of events. And once we do that, we then might return to our main focal point, back to the breath or back to the mantra to re-steady. So basically, we include whatever shows up in the meditation, and then we go through these cycles of steadying with concentration, and then observing or investigating what comes up with more of like the mindfulness aspect, and then come back to the concentration, and then back to the mindfulness and back to the concentration. We kind of go back and forth. We use the concentration to steady. We use the mindfulness to look a little more closely. So I hope that kind of makes sense. It's easier to understand in like a guided practice and with experience. The point is, if you don't think you can concentrate perfectly, don't let that stop you, because it's not all of what mindfulness is. We also practice forms of open awareness, just being present to our environment, for example, and also being aware through our senses in everyday life. Like walking meditation, for example, that can be done as more of a concentration practice, focusing more narrowly on the sensations in the feet. Or it could be done in a more receptive, open way with awareness of seeing, hearing, the feeling of stepping, the feeling of the body moving, just letting all of that in. It's all happening in the present moment, so it all counts. We also have other practices like mindful eating, where we can be aware of the smells, the tastes, the sensations that are involved in consuming our food. This is part of mindfulness practice. So while some types of meditation might be all about concentration, mindfulness meditation is not just always about focusing on one thing. And this is great news for those of us who find it really challenging to stay focusing on one thing, right? There are other ways you can genuinely practice mindfulness. And those mindfulness skills grow over time, and you may find that the concentration bit gets easier, but don't let it intimidate you, right? Just start where you are and explore your mindfulness practice. Okay, let's talk about the third misconception, that you have to get rid of your thoughts. And you've probably heard this one talked about by others and by myself, because it's probably the most prevalent misconception around any kind of meditation, and mindfulness included in that. So it is connected to that second myth I was just describing. You don't have to be amazing at concentration or able to clear your mind in order to practice mindfulness. In fact, we incorporate the thinking into our practice. Sounds radical, right? But in mindfulness meditation, we want to observe and learn from our thinking. And when I say that we learn from our thinking, it's not so much that we are learning from the content of our thinking. It's not exactly reflecting, or definitely not ruminating, right? The techniques of mindfulness are actually teaching us to look at the process of thinking, which means stepping back from the actual content and storylines that we're usually more or less lost in. So we often start with recognizing and labeling certain types of thoughts. You might be following your breath and then realize that thoughts are starting to take over. So you could note to yourself, oh, thinking, this is thinking, because you've recognized like the thoughts are here. That's mindfulness. You've already practiced mindfulness, just noticing that, oh my gosh, I'm thinking. Or It can get more specific, like, oh, these are worry thoughts, or I'm recognizing this is judgment. Judgment's coming up. Or I'm rehearsing a conversation that I have to have later, right? We get to know the flavor of each type of thought and get to see what our greatest hits are, the ones that come up a lot for us, and start to see how these thoughts and these patterns and habits of mind drive us through reactivity, make us reactive. They make us have emotional reactivity or take certain actions or behave in certain ways or communicate in certain ways or feel certain ways, right? In time, we learn how to be less driven by thoughts, especially those less than helpful ones we notice. We learn how to take them a little less personally, be less defined by them. And this is from working with our thinking mind by including it in our meditation. And so that helps us develop more clarity, unwind these habits, and to grow our ability to live with more intention. Okay? So hope that helps dispel that myth that you have to get rid of your thoughts, or that you'd even want to get rid of your thoughts in order to meditate or practice mindfulness. Not the case. Moving on to number 4. There's this myth sometimes, I've sort of seen this piece of confusion come up around, or concern come up around mindfulness, that it might be a kind of vigilance or self-consciousness, or that overly focusing on yourself will increase pain that you have, or anxiety or trauma that you have. And I really get this one, because when you are talking to someone who has a lot of physical pain, or who's going through heavy grief, or someone that has anxiety or trauma, it's not necessarily obvious how paying more attention is going to help. It's like, excuse me, this sucks. It's painful. Why do you want me to focus on it? Sometimes if we do that in the wrong way, it can actually increase the intensity of the experience and be harmful. I recently taught a few mindfulness workshops at a local cancer center, and hearing what people were going through as we went around the circle and they introduced themselves, I wasn't about to be like, yeah, just sit with that, pay attention, feel it to heal it. I just don't think that would have landed, or that would have been really insensitive, right? Wouldn't have been useful to the people who had come to this workshop. And another somewhat similar concern one might have is that mindfulness might make you too self-conscious. When we say in mindfulness that it's about paying attention to everything in our experience as much as possible, sometimes that can sound like a kind of hypervigilance or self-surveillance. And to be clear, that is not the intention. The idea is that with mindfulness, we are building both awareness and skills that help us work with our experiences in a wiser or more balanced way. So it's not scrutinizing ourselves in a critical way, or just paying attention to how unpleasant something is and going, oh, well, I guess this is what I have to tolerate. It's not drowning in it or getting lost in it or reinforcing a habit of fixating on what is painful, because none of that would be helpful, right? On the contrary, when you're in pain of some kind, mindfulness might help you notice what you're missing, what is good, what already feels fine, what is actually going okay. It can help us step out of tunnel vision and pessimistic assumptions that we naturally fall into when we're really worn down by struggle. Mindfulness helps us see context, a bigger picture. It can help us connect to the humanness of our struggles and move out of patterns of self-blame. The meditative practice can also teach us that we actually have some say in what we're paying attention to. And that is very powerful. It's not easy, of course. It takes a lot of consistent practice. But we don't have to just be yanked around by the habits of our mind or by whatever in our mind is screaming the loudest. We can learn to place our attention where it's more supportive, where it's more helpful, to be in the present moment and to be less lost in some of our more reactive mind states, or some of our more habitual worry states or frustration states, or whatever the pattern might be. And then when we do have the capacity to pay attention to the painful stuff, a true mindfulness practice would be teaching us how to be with it with less reactivity, which means to stop adding more fear, frustration, and tension into it, or at least do that less and less. And underneath the mindfulness meditation umbrella, the larger field of practices that are included, we also have what we call heart practices, which are attitudes and meditative techniques of kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, and other very supportive states. Any mindfulness practice is meant to be infused with these kinds of qualities, but there are also specific practices you can do. So rather than self-consciousness and negative hyper-focus on yourself, we learn self-compassion, which can be super healing and insightful. So if you're experiencing some intensity, mindfulness can be a great tool, but you want to start where it's doable. Choose from the many techniques within mindfulness and find what works to start with, and go gradually. Start small. Get guidance or find a supportive group that's practicing where you can hear from others about how they practice and get tips and be encouraged by them. So I hope that clarifies around this kind of concern or myth that mindfulness is like hypervigilance or self-consciousness, and gives you some sense of how actually we could broaden what we're paying attention to or shift what we're paying attention to and use the mindfulness skills in a way that helps us to deal with some of those intensities that we might be experiencing and to put them into a greater and kinder perspective. Okay, let's look at mindfulness myth number 5. So this is kind of different. This is a myth that I've kind of seen come up, that mindfulness is just like a useful tool for performing tasks or being more efficient in some way. Maybe you've seen this one in places where mindfulness is being adapted for like sports psychology or in a corporate or a workplace kind of setting where efficiency and performance are the values. And it kind of goes with that whole self-optimization thread that runs through our culture. And sure, mindfulness and concentration can absolutely make you better at your work or any number of things. It can help you filter out distractions and focus on what's important and get to the heart of things. It can help you communicate better, can help you handle pressure and stay steady. And even with that, some people are skeptical that mindfulness can even help in those ways. I did an episode a while back called Mindful versus Mindless that was based on an article I found on the internet where someone was talking about whether mindfulness was helpful for improving your golf swing. And they actually found that when golfers focused too hard on the details and mechanics, it messed them up. Not too surprising. But unfortunately, they concluded, well, mindfulness doesn't work. It's better to be mindless sometimes. So again, that's falling into the misunderstanding that mindfulness equals a self-conscious, hypervigilant kind of focus. You can listen to that episode if you're interested in my full rebuttal of all that, but I'll just say mindfulness is not the opposite of mastering a task to the point where it can be more or less automatic or done on muscle memory, like driving or like your golf swing. If you want mindfulness to help you with your golf game, don't overthink your swing with a tight and goal-oriented attention. You might bring in mindfulness to help you be aware of when you need a calm breath, or how you can become aware of unnecessary tension in your body so your swing feels more relaxed, or you can stand in a relaxed way, or how you can slow down between strokes and see your options more clearly before you choose your next club for the next hit, or the whatever you call it in golf. I don't know. My husband golfs. I don't know that much about it. But anyway, I do think mindfulness skills can help with tasks or sports or improving performance at work or wherever. But my main point was that benefit of mindfulness is not the be-all, end-all. There is much more available through the practice. It can open up a whole world of understanding and insight and perspective and being able to fully show up for your life. It can help you stay in touch with your humanness, your values, your sense of purpose and meaning, not just make you better at your job. Related to that, there are also these criticisms out there that you'll hear sometimes about mindfulness being offered in workplaces, because some are worried about these teachings being distorted by corporations to just make their employees into better capitalist widgets. And I think, those criticisms are well-founded in some cases, I'm sure. But there's also the possibility that one could be introduced to mindfulness at work and take their exploration further, and it could have a positive impact on how they approach their work. Or they might find themselves pushing for more human-centered decisions and policies in their company. Or they might realize the company's values don't align with theirs and choose to go elsewhere. Ultimately, mindfulness leads to self-knowledge and empathy and awareness. It is awareness, right? It might make you better at performing tasks because paying attention is generally a very helpful thing, but that is just the tip of the iceberg of what mindfulness can offer. Okay, number 6, the last one I wanted to talk about is the idea that mindfulness is an altered state or a trance or some form of escapism. Now, this one's kind of interesting, and it was prompted by a question that came up when I was guest teaching in a training a few weeks ago for a group of trauma-informed facilitators and teachers and counselors and educators, like a really lovely group of humans. And one of the participants brought up that she has a friend who's a therapist, and this therapist friend commented to her that they were worried about some of their clients using meditation as an escape or a way to dissociate. And yes, that could be a concern. Certain forms of meditation or stillness may not be appropriate for everyone, depending on their current mental health or stage of trauma healing. If dissociation is a concern, you'd want to be really discerning about what kinds of meditation are helpful or not, and you'd want to practice them with a skilled guide or perhaps a therapist. It may be that mindful movement is a better alternative, or walking meditation, something that keeps the body involved in an obvious way and helps you stay present. That said, mindfulness meditation is not about getting into a trance or creating any kind of altered state, really. I'm not speaking for all kinds of meditation. Again, there are some guided meditations you can find that are more like hypnosis and that do create a trance-like state. I know some people enjoy and probably benefit from that, and some of those techniques might be used therapeutically, I hope, with trained and responsible guides. But that is different than what we are doing in mindfulness. Mindfulness meditation is about being here. And that doesn't look or feel any particular kind of way. It's really not a special state that's different from our ordinary consciousness. It's just really being here, being really present, noticing what's right in front of us, what's happening now. In a way, that's like the exact opposite of an altered state or a trance, right? It's the opposite of an escape. If it's different at all from our habitual mind states, it's just because there's more clarity and less distraction. Not because we've followed Alice down the rabbit hole into Wonderland. Now, don't get me wrong. Meditation practices can be methods for evoking and exploring other states of consciousness. Within the Buddhist mindfulness tradition, you can certainly see this in the deeper concentration practices like the jhanas, which can produce blissful but temporary altered states of concentrated absorption. There is method, guidance, and skillfulness around how to use those wisely, though. There are also a few Buddhist teachers who include the use of psychedelics in their practice, which definitely create altered states, and use that as a complement to the traditional method. But again, this all needs to be approached with great care and responsibility. A spiritual practice of meditation is about changing how you experience the world, including your own body, heart, and mind. So exploring other states of consciousness can be part of that. Experiencing non-ordinary states can be healing and freeing when they leave us with more perspective, insight, or wisdom. When we have ways of integrating them. When they help us break free of limiting beliefs about ourselves or existence itself. So the difference is about how we contextualize or how we integrate such experiences, like peak experiences or heightened experiences or different states of consciousness than our usual mode of moving through the world, right? A spiritually freeing, altered state is not the same as dissociation. Dissociation does not leave us with more wisdom or insight. It's a disconnection from the present moment or disconnection from the body. And altered states are not what we're going for in the ordinary day-to-day practice of mindfulness, and certainly not for beginners or casual practitioners. Remember the popular phrase, "be here now," coined by Ram Dass? That is a simple way of describing mindfulness. Be here now. It's not an escape. It's a sophisticated set of practices and teachings to help us be embodied and connected and whole and present for our lives. Okay, so I hope that brings a little more clarity, or at least food for thought, to that whole idea of, what if meditation is an escape or a dissociation? Okay, so that's what I have for you on these 6 mindfulness myths or misconceptions. I hope it's been interesting to explore some of the nuances and possibilities of mindfulness that exist when we truly understand what it is. Thanks for being here and for listening. As always, I so appreciate your presence and your engagement with this topic. So feel free to reach out with any thoughts or comments or questions that might have come up with this whole set of mindfulness misconceptions. You might just inspire the next episode. Who knows? So once again, thank you very much for being here, and I hope you will be well until we connect again. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend, subscribe on YouTube, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find it that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, courses, or teacher trainings, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. This is Addie D. Hilster. Thanks so much for listening.